Netflix just dropped their live-action drama version of Erased, and since it's one of our favorite anime, Yazzie and I watched the hell out of it in the following days. Though we didn't just do it for fun. I had heard that the drama would be fixing the anime's oft-complained-about ending, and thought it would be fun to make an adapt or die video comparing the different versions of the story. I'm still working on that right now, actually, because as it turns out, comparing two 12-episode TV shows to almost 1,500 pages worth of graphic novel is, it's a wee bit time-consuming, especially since I'm trying to condense all of the info into a manageable video length. But while I was watching the drama and anime and reading the manga side by side, something kept bugging me. Erased, the drama, is an efficient retelling of Erased, the manga. By combining some scenes and trimming a lot of fat, it manages to hit basically all of the major plot points of the manga, chewing through it at a rate of about 2 6-chapter volumes every 3 episodes, where Erased, the anime, fell a full 2 volumes short in the same number of episodes and had to rush its ending as a result. In terms of story structure, the drama is objectively better than the anime. Its ending is a million times more satisfying and makes a lot more sense. But in terms of storytelling, the actual journey to get to that ending, I enjoy watching the anime far more. And that got me wondering. Anime fans place an enormous amount of importance on endings, just ask Arcada, but do bad endings really ruin shows? Or can a great show with a bad ending still be a great show? Erased, the anime, has several scenes that resonated with me on a deep emotional level, scenes that I hold up among the best directed and most moving in anime history, like Satoru's encounter with Kaio in the park, which I analyzed in depth up here, their trip to the Christmas tree, the birthday party, the heartbreaking moment when Kaio has a home-cooked breakfast for the first time, any key moment with Kaio, really, not to mention some brilliant moments of tension as the kids get closer to the killer. There's something on that level in almost every one of the first 10.5 episodes of the anime, and the drama hits all of the same plot points, but in it they're just that, plot points, things that happen to move the story forward, not the profound watershed moments that they are in the anime, and the manga to a slightly lesser extent. Going through 2 or 3 of these scenes per episode, the drama just doesn't have the time it needs to properly set up and execute them. It sucks a lot of the emotion out of these powerful moments, and even outside of those key scenes, its execution pales in comparison to some of the brilliant direction, editing, and use of sound in the anime. It's much less fulfilling and gripping to watch unfold. Pacing is one of those intangibles in writing that's really hard to precisely nail down, but when it's not done right, you really notice. The 2003 adaptation of Fullmetal Alchemist has a lot wrong with it compared to 2009's more manga-faithful FMA Brotherhood. FMA 2003 is pretty much the prototypical example of a bad anime ending. Its conclusion isn't just disappointing like Erased's, it actually undermines several of the things that made the original series so great. Fortunately, it's one of those rare bad anime endings that's actually been rectified. Overall, I do like Brotherhood more because the overarching narrative builds up in a much more satisfying manner after the split in the story, and the conclusion is close to perfect. It's one of my 10 favorite anime of all time, while the 2003 series is top 50 at best. But when it was first airing, I actually gave up on watching it. My reaction to the first handful of episodes wasn't excitement, it was disappointment. Because when we compare just the first 28 episodes of FMA minus 6 of filler to the 13 that cover the same story beats in Brotherhood, the 2003 series wins handily, especially if we're talking about the episode that defined the series for many fans, Night of the Chimera's Cry. The tragic tale of Sho Tucker and his daughter Nina plays out across 2 episodes of the 2003 anime. Episode 6 introduces the Tuckers as the Elrics begin lodging with them in the months leading up to their state alchemy exam. In episode 7, after Ed passes the exam, the Tuckers jump from supporting roles into the spotlight as the Elrics dig a little too deep into Sho's research and discover the dark truth about the talking chimera that made him famous. It's one of those episodes that makes you think, God damn, this show will never be the same again. Brotherhood blows through this whole storyline in just one episode, having the Elrics simply study under Tucker rather than living with him, and compressing their entire period of getting to know him and Nina into just a few in-story days and 10 real-time minutes, with the last 8 covering show's monstrous secrets. In the 2003 series, we see the Tuckers become almost a second family to Ed and Al. The series draws direct parallels between Sho and Nina and Best Dad Maze Hughes. Sho Tucker is a legitimate mentor to the boys, helping them pass their exams, and they have months to build a strong emotional attachment to Nina and her dog Alexander. We see seasons pass in the build-up to the exams. There's also more going on around them at the time. The Tuckers aren't the sole focus of the story, so when Sho kicks them out and reveals his true colors, it both comes as a legitimate surprise and feels like a devastating betrayal. Here we see someone who the boys trusted and looked up to, a father figure even, who turned out to be a monster, and who hurt someone they deeply care about in the process. Yet the really scary thing is that we can also kind of understand him, because we see the pressure that he's under from the state and his desperation to make another scientific breakthrough. He's a monster, but a frighteningly sympathetic one, the kind of person Ed could easily turn into if his morals waver. After all, the boys have already committed an equally horrific alchemic taboo. It also goes without saying that finding the remains of Nina in the alleyway themselves is much more devastating for Ed and Al than simply hearing about it from Hawkeye in the next episode. It's a defining moment for the Elrics, on par with the death of their mother. With the way Brotherhood rushes through the story, its impact is very different. Sho Tucker is just some vaguely creepy old dude with a cute daughter who the Elrics spend weeks chilling with. When we find out what he did to his daughter, it's sad and frightening, sure, but nowhere near to the same degree. It's also a lot more predictable, since Sho Tucker is made to feel more like a one-and-done story of the week character rather than a potentially permanent fixture in the supporting cast. A single episode simply doesn't give this story the time it needs to build up properly. And coming earlier in the series, episode 4 rather than episode 7, there's less build up to it overall. The same is true of, well, pretty much everything that happens in the first 14 episodes of FMA Brotherhood. From Lior to the fight with Greed, none of the early Brotherhood stories hit the same way that they do in the 2003 series. There's a good reason for this. Studio Bones rushed through the manga content that they'd already covered to get to the good stuff they hadn't, after which they slowed down. They knew that most fans would have already seen the original series and resigned themselves to letting that be the better version of the early parts of the story. The first 13 episodes of Brotherhood aren't really a show in themselves, they're a recap for people who don't want to sit through the first half of the original actual show. They're busy work that the series does so that it can technically be called a complete story. The first 28 episodes of the 2003 series are simply better television and essential watching for any FMA fan. And even if the latter half of that series does go off the rails, that doesn't stop those episodes from being great. They're not diminished simply because the events that follow them are weaker by comparison to Brotherhood. And if you average out the moments of good storytelling in FMA against the bad, even after the story splits off, it's still a great series overall. Both Brotherhood and the original series could have handled this a lot worse. Just look at the super rushed train wreck that concludes Blue Exorcist and the stupidly confusing cold open of the Kyoto arc that aired this year. That split with no recap makes the series really hard to follow, or pick back up if you watched the original when it aired, but that doesn't stop the show from being a really fun shonen romp once it gets rolling again. But diversions in adaptation aren't the only cause of bad endings, and endings can get a lot worse than that of FMA 2003 or Erased. You might not know it because I kinda keep it on the down low, but I hate Sword Art Online. And while it made a lot of mistakes in its run, a huge part of the problem is is the second part of Season 1, the Fairy Dance arc. It is not the only problem the show has by a long shot, but the Fairy Dance arc is still a disastrous conclusion to what was, up to that point, at least an okay story with a few really great moments and some really terrible ones. It actively undermines every one of SAO's strengths, turning the show's best character into a rape damsel and totally halting all character growth for the protagonist. Though I'm gonna be talking about that in much more detail in an upcoming video, so I'll leave the summary at that for now. The Fairy Dance arc systematically destroyed all of my investment in SAO and made me more aware retroactively of the countless flaws in the show's first half. And I don't think that I'm alone in that experience. I'd wager that most people began disliking the show somewhere in the middle of that arc, and even most of the people who are still fans see it as a serious black spot on the series. On the surface, this looks like a pretty definitive example of an ending that ruins a show, but it's a little bit different. It's not just a bad conclusion, but an entire bad story arc. It makes up a good 40% of the show's total runtime, so it's not quite the same thing in my view. A better example would probably be this year's Kado: The Right Answer, an original anime that had no manga to draw from, and thus no excuse for how it ended. For the first 10 episodes, counting episode 0, Kado is quite possibly the best science fiction anime ever. A fascinating and unique first contact story that delves into extra-dimensional physics and explores the world-changing socio-political impact that the sudden introduction of hyper-advanced alien technology would have on Earth. It's like no anime you've ever seen. But then, episode 9 ends with a Dragon Ball battle and superpowered aliens start fighting for the future of humanity, and all of a sudden, it's like every anime you've ever seen. The political and existential elements of the story are still there. One alien's monologue about how they became Earth's biggest fan is a fantastic bit of character building, but it becomes more and more about dumb, outlandish, physics-defying physical conflict rather than the conflict of ideas. And the ending is the kind of ass pull you can only get when you're pulling it out of an ass that exists in infinite dimensions. I really enjoyed the ride up to the point that Kado broke down. I think that it raises a lot of interesting questions, and seeing the world change across those first 10 episodes is fascinating. But I also struggle to recommend it, even based on those strengths, because the last quarter of the story goes against almost everything that made the first 3 quarters so good. I think that the problem with Kado is that rather than an emotional attachment to the characters, though it does allow for that, the driving force of our investment in its plot is meant to be our interest in the questions that it's posing. So when the show's answer to those questions turns out to be overly simplistic and kinda dumb, humans good, aliens bad, and sort of comes out of nowhere, that retroactively negates a lot of the audience's enjoyment of the show. This doesn't just apply to philosophical shows. A character-driven drama that finds a way to betray someone's emotional attachment to the characters can have similar issues. I think that's what makes so many people hate School Days, and conversely, Usagi Drop's anime is infinitely more enjoyable if you don't know how the manga ends. Don't look that up, by the way. Maybe Erased has the same problem for some viewers. For me, it was my attachment to Satoru and his friends that kept me engaged, so I wasn't too bothered when the ending focused on those relationships to the absolute detriment of the plot. But for someone who wanted a murder mystery, or wanted the catharsis of seeing the killer brought to justice in a satisfying way, or wanted a bunch of the other plot lines tied up, I can see how the ending would feel like a much worse betrayal of their expectations, like Kado was for me and a lot of others. So, a bad ending can definitely ruin your enjoyment of a series, or it can be a total non-issue, but does our individual disappointment or lack thereof actually make these bad shows? That's a complicated question, because the quality of a show's production is both separate from our personal experience. There are millions of different technical aspects that can be objectively evaluated as being done well or done poorly, but it's also impossible to objectively measure the quality of the whole. Kemono Friends is a technical failure, and people love it. Satoru's stupid fucking wink doesn't magically make the shot composition, animation, and editing in any of the previous scenes scenes of Erased worse, and in technical terms, even the ending is well directed, it's just poorly written. And the baffling conclusion to Kato doesn't make its advancements in CG animation any less impressive, nor does it make the actual ideas behind the story any less interesting. It just punishes you for thinking about them after the fact. I don't know if I can give this question a right answer. See what I did there? But maybe I can answer it with a different question. Neon Genesis Evangelion has a legendarily bad, or at least legendarily awkward ending.
Congratulations!
They had to make a whole movie to fix it, and they actually went and made that movie. So my question is this: was Evangelion a bad TV show, or even a less good one, before End of Evangelion came out? Did it suddenly become a better show once the movie came out, even though the movie doesn't actually alter any of the content in the original show? Or was it just as good, or bad if you feel that way about it, before and after the movie? This video's already running a bit long, so maybe I'll elaborate on Eva another time, but personally, I don't think the existence of the movie changes the quality of the show itself. Just like I don't think watching the first 10 episodes of Erased and then reading the rest of the manga, or doing the opposite because you hate yourself, I guess, changes the quality of either version of that story. But maybe your answer to these questions is different. That's also legitimate. And if you disagree with me or agree with me, I'd love to hear your thoughts as to why in the comments below. And while you're at it, I sure would appreciate it if you'd well, you know how this ending goes. Thank you so much to all of my wonderful Patreon patrons for all that you've done for me over the year, both for supporting me financially and for giving me feedback on my content, and for just being cool people I can talk to sometimes. You guys are great, and I cannot thank you enough for being so great. If you want to see me talk about Erased some more, click here for an analysis of the OP, and for a broader counterpoint to this video, click here for a discussion of how to start an anime right, also featuring Kato. If this is the last I see of you today, I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.